Hello and welcome to this video. We've had many requests on how best to apply contrast paints to vehicles. So in this video, we're going to show you how to do that. Now, a top tip is to actually use a coloured spray to your advantage. Even though you might have used a light spray and then applied contrast paints over that, having a coloured spray will make your vehicles look a bit darker, but that's okay because more often than not, the vehicles are made from different materials than the troops. So that's fine. So our first example is going to be an ultramarine rhino. Now I'm going to be using ultramarine's blue over Macragge blue spray, and I'm just going to be running this into the recesses and around rivets. You'll still get some of the tones of the ultramarine blue, even if you've used ultramarine blue all over your troops. So it'll still tie in quite nicely. So our first example for that is to just use a small layer brush. Just apply a little bit to the palette. Again, we're looking for neatness here as much as we can. So get a nice point to the brush. And then all we're going to do is then start looking for those deeper recesses and start running it in. So again, take your time, work your way around. Now there'll be times where obviously when you're doing this, you're going to splodge and you're going to get little bits on the side. Like so, that's okay because in a minute or two, we're going to tidy back up with Macragge blue. So don't be too concerned by that. You'll also notice I'm not glued the tracks on because normally when I do coloured sprays like this, I'll spray the tracks separately silver. So it's a lot less work to do. There we are, the ultramarine's blue now applied and dry in those recesses. What we're going to do now is move on to a tidy up stage. All we're going to basically do here is use Macragge blue and just tidy up any areas where we may have splodged. So what I'm going to do is use my small layer brush, apply a little bit to the palette, a little bit of water so it's not too thick and goopy. Key bit obviously to make sure you get a nice point to your brush, and then we're going to start picking out those areas where you may splodge on. So you've got some areas here where it could just do with a little bit of a tidy up. Now, at first glance, this might seem like a long-winded way of doing it, just doing all this recess shading and tidying up, but actually, like for like, it's actually quicker than applying the paint all over and then tidying up after. So just take your time, work around any areas that are just a bit untidy, and again, just use a small layer brush for this. There we are, with that tidy stage now done. What we're going to do now is move on to highlighting that tank with a dry brush, and for this I'm going to use Calgar blue. It's a nice natural highlight for most ultramarines. So I'm just going to use a small dry brush for this, just apply a little bit to my brush, not too much. And all I'm going to do is just go crisscross circles like that a few times, just to remove most of that pigment off, but it will still leave traces on it. Again, it's worth just going to a bare patch just to make sure you've got most of it from the middle as well. As you can see, there's still a little bit there. So just, once I've done that, and then ready to start gently dry brushing over those raised areas. So you don't want to put too much pressure on it. It's almost like tickling it. So just back and forth really gently, and you'll see it starts to pick out those edges. There we are, with that dry brush now done. You can see by just applying contrast into those recesses, it gives it a really nice, simple, effective result, especially combining that with a highlight like we've done here. Now, if we stick a model next to it that's also been painted with contrast, you can see it's quite sympathetic to that colour scheme as well. So there we are. So what we're going to now do is look at our next technique, which is to apply contrast all over a vehicle. Now, sometimes this can come out quite blotchy, so what we need to do is thin this down with contrast medium, but it works really well over metallics. Now, what I've got here is a rhino that's been undercoated with lead belcher. What I'm going to be doing here is applying Griff Charger Grey thin down with contrast medium. Now, I'll be using 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part Griff Charger Grey. So I'll be using my large shade brush. So all I'm going to do is just grab that, get a couple of paintbrushes worth of contrast, like so. Dollop that onto my palette and give it a quick wash. Just dry that off like so. And then I'm just going to get 1 paintbrush of Griff Charger Grey. I'm just going to mix that in and then load the brush up. Now I'm just going to give it a bit of a tap because I don't want too much on there just yet, because otherwise I end up pooling. We might just get a few blotches if we're not careful. So all I'm going to do is then just start applying that on. As you can see, it's quite runny. Just by applying this over like so, you can see it's starting to run into those recesses. You will get some areas that start to blotch on the actual panels, but that's fine because we can tidy that back up with a dry brush in a minute or two. Just take your time and just work your way around, forcing most of that contrast into the recesses where possible. There we are, with that contrast now applied and dry, you can see it started to really settle in those recesses. There is a little bit of blotchiness on the panels, but that's fine because what we're going to do now is we're going to start doing some dry brushing. We're going to start with lead belcher first. This is more to hide some of that blemishing. Then after that, we'll use Stormhost Silver to do some highlighting. But let's start off with that lead belcher. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit onto my bristles like so. And then with any dry brushing, the aim here is to rub as much off as possible. So I'm just going to do circular motions, crisscrossing like so. And then I'm just going to check here. That's a little bit too heavy still, so a little bit more. There we are. Now this is going to be a subtle effect, so what we're aiming to do is just gently just build on those surface areas, and it's almost like layering it back over again, and that will hide some of that blemishing. Now work your way all through the panels, avoid those recesses where possible, and then if you do find you've got some blemishes still here and there, that's fine because we can turn that into weathering later on. A little bit of pressure here and there. There we are with that lead belted dry brush now done. It's removed most of those blemishes. So what I'm going to do now is highlight this silver using Stormhost silver. So I'm just going to do a soft dry brush. It's almost like a tickle. And all we're doing is just gently moving our way across all those details. Now sometimes you might have to do a couple of passes just to build up that colour. Try not to do it all in one go because sometimes it can look quite messy. So just take your time, work your way around, and aim to pick out those raised areas. There we are with that highlight dry brush now done. What we're going to do now is move on to picking out any little blemishes that remain and turn them into chipping and weathering. Now for this we'll be using Inky by Darkness because tonally it's very similar to Griff Charger Grey. So I'm just going to thin this down a little bit and then start looking for some blemishes and make them into little dents and little bits of scratches and stuff. So what I'm going to do is apply a little bit to the palette, a little bit of water, not too much. I'm using a small layer brush for this so I can get a nice point as well. Once I've loaded my brush up, start working our way around. So I'm just going to go to the front here because you've got a couple of like little bits and bobs. So what I'm going to do is just do like a little couple of like dots like so, little line there. You can also, where there isn't any, like around the edges, just make your own little scratches coming up like that with your finger. Work your way around. Just take your time, study the model. Just look for anything you're not happy with and just turn it into some damage. And there we are, just by applying a little bit of Inky by Darkness over some of those blemishes and adding a few scratches here and there, you can see it's given it a nice weathered, battle-worn effect. So there we are, that's just a couple of examples on how to use contrast over vehicles. Again, just swapping out some of the colours that match your army will give you some really nice, simple, effective results. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed painting your own contrast on vehicles, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.